Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The biggest story of the day comes from North Korea, and the story is in the pictures. It's a Putin-Kim bromance, perfectly choreographed and timed. We'll tell you what happened in Pyongyang today and what the world should make of it. In India, the American delegation met the Dalai Lama and poked China with some harsh statements. Is it time for New Delhi to tweak its Tibet policy? We'll discuss. In Canada, they're celebrating a Khalistani terrorist in Parliament and exposing Western hypocrisy on terrorism. What should India do? A project to develop the Great Nicobar Island that would help contain China is being opposed by the Congress party. We'll tell you why. In South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa takes oath as president again, but this time with a coalition government. In Kenya, protests over new taxes, hundreds of arrests and a rollback. In the US election, Joe Biden unveils a new Trump card, a new immigration program. And the story of Nvidia, how it became the world's most valuable company. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Extreme heat kills more than 550 people during the Hajj pilgrimage, 68 Indians among the casualties. For the past few years, the pilgrimage has fallen during the sweltering summer in Saudi Arabia. The Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam that all Muslims must perform at least once in their lifetime. In India, no relief for Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal. His judicial custody has been extended till the 3rd of July. The Enforcement Directorate says it has proof that Kejriwal demanded millions in kickbacks in the now withdrawn liquor policy case. An ammunition depot fire in Chad kills at least 9 people. The fire triggered a series of blasts which shook buildings miles away. More than 40 people were also injured in the incident which took place in the capital. Chad is one of the world's poorest nations. Myanmar authorities arrest 22 people for marking the birthday of Aung San Suu Kyi. She's been detained by the military since 2021 after the junta toppled her government and seized power. Suu Kyi, who turned 79 today, is serving a 27-year sentence. And the European Union rebukes France for breaking the bloc's budget rules. It comes days before snap elections in the country where the far right and left have made lavish spending promises. This is the first time that France is in the EU's public spending blacklist since President Macron came to power in 2017. "25 years, a quarter of a century. That's how long Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia. In this time, he's visited around 70 countries. He's walked many red carpets, but this one beats all of it. I'm talking about North Korea. Vladimir Putin landed in Pyongyang on Tuesday night. The city was all decked up to welcome him. We are talking the whole shebang. Portraits of Putin, flags of Russia, even Russian music on state television. Take a look. I guess it was to be expected. North Korea does not get many visitors, certainly not world leaders like Putin. So Kim Jong-un rolled out his fanciest red carpet. He was at the airport himself. He greeted Putin with a handshake followed by a semi-hug. Now this visit is very important. Putin last came to North Korea in the year 2000, so it's been 24 years. And in this time, in these 24 years, the equations have changed. Kim was not leading North Korea back then. His father was. Plus, in the year 2000, Putin was a newbie on the world stage. Now he's a seasoned but isolated leader. These two had a meeting last year as well, Kim and Putin. Kim traveled to a Russian city, a city in the Russian Far East. And now Putin is returning the favor. As with any visit, let's look at two aspects here. The first is chemistry. Putin and Kim looked quite comfortable with each other. One moment probably sums it up best. Both men were about to enter a car, but they couldn't decide who would go first. Take a look. The pomp wasn't over yet. This is a two-day state visit by the Russian president, so the official welcome was still pending. It was organized at the Kim Il-sung Square. Again, the pictures were stunning. The roads were lined with hundreds of people. They waved Russian and North Korean flags. In typical Kim style, everything was choreographed. Later in the day, there was more bromance. Putin gifted a Russian limousine to Kim Jong-un. He also drove Kim around Pyongyang. Look at this. So we've covered the first aspect, the chemistry and optics. Now we come to the second, the substance. Putin and Kim held a long bilateral meeting. It lasted for nearly 2 hours. After that, they signed a new bilateral agreement. They upgraded their relationship to the next level, that of comprehensive strategic partnership. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things. Putin and Kim hinted at multiple areas of cooperation: military technology, mutual assistance in case of aggression, coordination on healthcare, and also education and science. Now, two of these stand out: sharing military technology and mutual defense. Very significant. Putin is saying that he may defend North Korea if it is attacked. And that's a big promise to make. Same with military technology. Sanctions prevent countries from selling technology to North Korea, especially strategic ones. But Vladimir Putin is saying he may do it anyway. Which brings us to the statements. What did Kim and Putin say? Kim offered full support for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Putin slammed US efforts to isolate Kim. Listen in.
The government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea expresses full support and solidarity with the Russian government, army, and people in carrying out a special military operation in Ukraine to protect their sovereignty, security interests, as well as territorial integrity.
We highly appreciate your consistent and unwavering support for Russian policy, including the Ukrainian strand. I am referring to our fight against the hegemonic policy imposed for decades, the imperialist policy of the United States and its satellites against the Russian Federation.
That was Putin's day in Pyongyang, eventful and colorful. But what will be the impact of this visit? How should the world see it? This visit symbolizes a revival of ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. Time for a short history lesson. In the 1950s, Kim's grandfather was ruling North Korea. His name was Kim Il-sung. He was supported by Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Back then, ties were great. Pyongyang was a satellite of Moscow, but Stalin died in 1953, and after that, the ties changed. Kim Il-sung purged pro-Soviet forces in his regime. He began consolidating power. Thus, Moscow and Pyongyang grew apart. Cut to 2024. things are on track again. Putin and Kim have revived the 1950s romance. The question is, will it last? Well, there is nothing organic about this relationship. It is based on common enmity towards the US. Having said that, there is scope for expansion. Let's look at what each side stands to get. First, Kim Jong-un. He needs food and fuel for his people, and Russia can help him. It is the largest wheat exporter in the world, also one of the biggest sources of energy, one of the biggest energy producers. So clear synergy there. Kim also needs advanced military technology, especially on ballistic missiles. Again, who can give him that? The Russians. Also sanctions relief. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It can shield Kim from further sanctions. So the North Korean leader has a lot to gain. Which brings us to Putin. What does he stand to gain? A useful supplier of military goods like bullets. In fact, North Korean equipment has already been spotted in Ukraine, plus a new deterrent. Someone who can keep the US busy in the Pacific. And Washington knows this. They're concerned about this new partnership.
The deepening cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is something that should be of concern, especially to anyone that's interested in maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, but also supporting the people of Ukraine as they continue to fight against Russian aggression.
There are two ways of looking at this. The West says, look at how isolated Putin is. So isolated that he's meeting Kim. But that's not how Putin sees it. For him, it's a strategy to counter the West. And for that, optics don't matter. The war in Gaza has taken a dramatic turn and claimed yet another casualty. Israel's relationship with the United States. These two countries have been close allies for decades. America is Israel's biggest supporter, diplomatically, militarily, and financially. But now there's a rift, and it is widening. So much so that the Israeli Prime Minister is accusing Washington of withholding weapons, and Washington is said to have scolded Netanyahu. Like I said, quite dramatic. It started with a video message where the Israeli Prime Minister pressed the self-destruct button. He suggested that the US is weakening Israel in the war against Hamas. Listen to this.
It's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life. Give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Netanyahu took direct aim at US President Joe Biden and his Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Earlier this month, Blinken was in Israel. He met Netanyahu. Now the Israeli Prime Minister has shared details about that meeting. He says he had a candid conversation with Blinken and he complained about military aid because the US has curtailed supplies. It has stopped the transfer of some ammunition, so Netanyahu complained to Blinken. And what was Blinken's response? He blamed it on quote-unquote bottlenecks and he promised a quick resolution. But it seems that the Israeli leader is running out of patience. So he decided to make their differences public. And which supplies is Netanyahu talking about? A shipment of joint direct attack munitions, better known as 2,000-pound bombs. America was supplying these bombs to Israel, but in April, the US withheld one shipment, just one shipment was withheld. And now Netanyahu is making a big deal about it.
We have one case that the president's talked about publicly, about the 2,000-pound bombs and concerns that we have about them being used in densely populated areas. That remains. We continue to work through that.
Now, to put this in perspective, let's look at the defense supply that Israel has got in this war from America. This is what the US has given Israel. More than 2,000 Hellfire missiles, 36,000 rounds of cannon ammo, 1,800 bunker buster munitions, 3,500 night vision devices, more than 50,000 artillery shells, 30,000 propelling charges for howitzers, and thousands of tank rounds and artillery shells. And this is the stuff that has been made public. This is the supply that we know of. American support extends beyond this. A large number of their shipments are also classified. So the US military aid has been massive. But now one shipment is stopped and Netanyahu goes to town with it. The Americans aren't happy about this. Their response has been sharp. They've cancelled a key visit. A group of Israeli officials was on its way to the U.S. They were invited to the White House for talks, but now the meeting has been called off, and the White House has also rubbished Netanyahu's claims.
I was asked a question. I answered it. I don't know what he's talking about. We were very clear about there being one shipment that we're continue to have construction conversations with Israel about. Nothing else has been paused. You heard that directly from Secretary Blinken. I can't speak for the Prime Minister. He's clearly speaking for himself.
Later, the U.S. ambassador to Israel paid a visit to Netanyahu. And he is said to have, quote unquote, scolded the Israeli Prime Minister. The American ambassador is said to have scolded the Israeli Prime Minister and told him that his claims are both inaccurate and out of line. This confrontation has been building for a while. When Israel began the war in Gaza, it had the full support of America. But as civilian casualties rose and domestic protests increased in the U.S., Biden shifted his stance. He's also contesting a presidential election this year, so the Muslim American votes and the liberal votes matter. At the same time, there's a good number of Jewish votes in the U.S. The president wants all of it, so he's calibrating his position by drawing some clear red lines for Israel. Biden told Netanyahu to not invade Rafah. He said he won't provide bombs or artillery for this operation. In fact, let me quote from what the U.S. president said last month. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons. But Israel did go into Rafah. They launched a wide-scale operation, and now they're turning north to Lebanon for an all-out war with the Hezbollah. Israeli officials say that they're ready for a war with Lebanon. Washington has mobilized its diplomats. They're meeting regional stakeholders, trying to avert a wider conflict.
We have seen an escalation over the last few weeks. And what President Biden wants to do is to avoid a further escalation to a greater war. That is the effort here. But this is a very serious situation that we are in.
The U.S. envoy says the situation is serious, but Netanyahu may not pay heed to America's appeals because it suits his politics. To openly take on Joe Biden, it boosts domestic support for Netanyahu, especially his conservative base. So what can the U.S. leader do? Biden's options are limited. He could cut military aid. The U.S. gives a lot of it to Israel, $3.8 billion every year, and even more during the war. Last month, the U.S. Congress passed a bill for another $14 billion of military support to Israel, and one more proposal is on the table, a new weapons package worth $18 billion, including the transfer of F-16 fighter jets, around 50 of them, 50 jets. The deliveries won't be immediate. They could take several years, but the numbers are significant. And earlier this week, reports said that Washington may clear this package. But now Netanyahu is openly accusing Biden of sabotaging his war. Will this force a rethink in the White House? It's going to be a tough one for the U.S. president. Despite the differences, Israel is a critical ally for the U.S., plus there will be domestic repercussions. Like I said, Jews are an influential vote bank in America. If Biden cuts support to Israel, it may benefit the Republicans. The other option is to keep supporting Israel and ignoring Netanyahu's outburst. But this could trigger a broader regional conflict, and that's the last thing anyone needs right now. So Joe Biden only has bad options, and he must pick one sooner rather than later.
President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything.
Suppose you want to poke China. Who do you call? The answer is Nancy Pelosi. First, she enraged China by visiting Taiwan. Now she's enraging China by meeting the Dalai Lama. It's apparently her superpower. But jokes aside, she is quite good at it. Pelosi is part of a high-ranking U.S. delegation. They landed in Dharamshala in India on Tuesday, and today they met the Dalai Lama. We told you about this visit yesterday. The delegation has both Democrats and Republicans. Their aim is to show solidarity with Tibetans. I would say Nancy Pelosi went a step ahead. She did not just show solidarity with Tibetans, she launched an all-out attack on Xi Jinping. Listen to this.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with his message of knowledge and tradition and compassion and purity of soul and love, he will live a long time and his legacy will live forever. But to you, President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything.
Strong words there. Pelosi says history will remember the Dalai Lama, but it will erase Xi Jinping. China certainly won't like that, but I guess that's the point. This whole visit is about poking China, about putting the focus back on Tibet. It started earlier this year with a new bill. It was passed by the US Congress in February. And what does it say? That China must restart talks with Tibetan officials. Now, just to be clear, this law has no bearing in China. They will simply brush it aside. America cannot draft laws for China. But this move does reveal their priorities. That the Americans are focusing on Tibet again. And not just America. Most democracies are talking about Tibet again. The European Union is. Australia is. So why isn't India? New Delhi is better placed than other countries. It is the home of the Tibetan movement. The Dalai Lama lives here. The Tibetan government is based here. Yet there is a sort of ambivalence. Let's look at the history first. India and Tibet used to be neighbors for a long time. Back then, it was a separate kingdom, Tibet, sort of like a buffer between the two big civilizations of India and China. But that changed in 1950. China sent soldiers into Tibet. They annexed the whole region and made it a part of China. Now, this posed a challenge for India. Suddenly, the border with Tibet became the border with China. In 1954, New Delhi recognized China's move. It accepted that Tibet is part of China. But in 1959, the Dalai Lama fled to India. Jawaharlal Nehru was Prime Minister then. He gave asylum to the Dalai Lama and his followers, and they've been living here since. Which brings us to the present. India finds itself in a unique position. On the one hand, India accepts China's control over Tibet. On the other, India hosts a Tibetan government in exile. It may look like a tough position to be in, but it's also a blessing. New Delhi can use Tibet to put pressure on China. Just consider this US delegation. You can't have a visit like this without India's help on Indian soil. The question is, what should India do with this unique position? Prime Minister Modi started on a positive note. He invited many leaders for his inauguration in 2014. Among them was the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile. And it was seen as a message to China. But in 2019, there was no invite. In 2024, same thing, no invite for the Tibetans. But in between this, there was another positive signal. In 2021, Prime Minister Modi wished the Dalai Lama on his birthday. It was the first outreach from the Indian Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, to the Dalai Lama. It came after 7 years in office. Since then, it's become a tradition. The Dalai Lama's next birthday is on the 6th of July. I'm sure Modi will reach out again. He should. But this time, maybe the Prime Minister should go one step ahead. Instead of a tweet, maybe he should meet the Dalai Lama. It hasn't happened in a long time. The last such meeting was in the year 2010. That's when the Dalai Lama met then Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. We say it's time for a repeat. China keeps claiming Indian territory as its own, so why shouldn't India poke back? Just look at New Delhi's policy on Taiwan. On paper, it's the one China policy, but India has slowly diluted it. After Modi won a third term in office, the Taiwanese president congratulated him. And guess what? Prime Minister Modi replied to him. If the Taiwan policy can be diluted, why not the Tibet policy? It's a question that India must think about. We are well placed to amplify the Tibetan movement globally, whether it's hosting conferences or inviting foreign delegations or including Tibet in India's diplomatic agenda. Morally, it's the right thing to do. Strategically, it's a good way to pressure China. Let's turn to Canada now. Their parliament started on a solemn note yesterday. With a moment of silence, all the lawmakers joined in. They stood in silence with their head bowed. It was quite a sight. Such gestures are not uncommon in parliaments. Usually they are done to mark a tragedy or to remember victims of terrorism, but not this one. Canada's moment of silence was for a terrorist.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, assassinated in Surrey, British Columbia, 1 year ago today. I now invite honourable members to rise.
How about that? A moment of silence for Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a bona fide Khalistani separatist. A man designated as a terrorist by the government of India. How can a democracy do this? It's bad enough to host and cultivate a terrorist. Canada has gone one step ahead. They're openly and officially mourning a slain terrorist. And it's not just Justin Trudeau's government. I hope you heard what the Canadian speaker said. All parties agreed to this moment of silence, meaning the opposition signed on. Imagine if some other country had done this, honored a terrorist in their parliament. The reaction would have been very, very different. But no one is questioning Canada. Nijjar wasn't some martyr who gave up his life for the country. He was a terrorist, a man of violence who met a violent end. Canada has tried hard to cover that up. Many news publications there called him an ordinary plumber. In that case, why is Canada's parliament honouring him? Does every victim of street violence get a moment of silence in their parliament? So let's call it what it is, a purely political move meant to appease Khalistanis. But why now? Because Tuesday was Nijjar's death anniversary. On June 18th last year, he was shot dead in British Columbia. Canada accuses India of ordering this hit. But India has denied the allegations, and this controversy has already plunged relations to rock bottom. Yet what does Canada do? Celebrate Nijjar inside its parliament. Which makes one thing quite clear. Justin Trudeau is not interested in handling this responsibly. He wants to make a spectacle out of it. He wants to milk it for political gains, and his attitude is emboldening Khalistanis. They organized a rally on Tuesday. Look at the posters they use. They've edited a picture of Prime Minister Modi. It shows him behind bars in a prisoner's clothing. And look at the caption. It says, "I killed Nijjar." What sort of country allows this? We understand free speech and expression, but this is beyond that. These separatists are calling a Prime Minister a murderer, yet Canada does nothing. Compare this to what happened in 2021. A protester threw gravel at Justin Trudeau, tiny pieces. So Trudeau did not even realize what happened. But guess what Canada did? The case dragged on for 2 years, and in 2023, the man got 90 days of house arrest and 1 year of probation. What does that tell you? That Canada does have limits for protesting. They just don't apply to protests against India. The question is, what more can New Delhi do? We've tried sharp statements, we've tried condemnation. None of it has worked. Western politicians refuse to acknowledge the Khalistani problem. Of course, some of it is political. In Canada, for instance, Khalistanis are a powerful political group. So leaders like Trudeau want their votes. No amount of diplomacy will sway them. But elsewhere, India could try harder. The first strategy is messaging, exposing the reality of the Khalistan movement. It has virtually disappeared in India. It is now largely a diaspora campaign. But how many in the West know that? They think that Khalistanis have popular support in India, so it's important to set the record straight. And how do you do that? Perhaps through speeches and statements at bodies like the United Nations. India regularly talks about terrorism. It also accuses countries like Pakistan of playing politics around it. So why not name Khalistani terrorism too? Why not use global forums to raise awareness? There's a great opportunity next week. Sunday, this coming Sunday, marks the anniversary of the Kanishk bombing. Kanishk was the name of an Air India flight. It was flying from Montreal to New Delhi in 1985. Khalistanis blew it up. They blew up the plane. It remains the worst terrorist attack in Canada's history. Justin Trudeau may not talk about it, but India should. Which brings us to the second strategy, and that is building support. You can't take on such missions alone. You need allies. So India must build a coalition of like-minded countries. I'll give you a few examples. Sri Lanka. They supported India against Canada. In fact, they have similar complaints. Colombo says that Sri Lankan terrorists have also found a new home in Canada. Another example is Bangladesh. They too have the same complaint. An assassin of Bangladesh's founding father lives in Canada, but Justin Trudeau has refused to extradite him. Russia is another case. They say Britain is harboring Chechen terrorists. So why can't these countries band together? Why can't they question this hypocrisy? This is the only way to make the West act. India has a lot of goodwill in the global south. It is time to put that goodwill to use. Where would India's next big security challenge come from? Most likely the high seas. The indications are all there. The recent conflict in the Red Sea made it quite clear. Protecting shipping lanes is more important now than ever before, especially for a country like India, which is surrounded by water on three sides. Chinese ships are frequenting these waters. China has built ports all around us, and their presence is a matter of concern. So in recent years, India has also tried to boost its capabilities to build deterrence on the high seas. And this story tonight is about one such plan. It centers on an island called the Great Nicobar. It is part of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, located in the Bay of Bengal, a small patch of land, just 910 square kilometers, mostly covered with tropical rainforest. New Delhi plans to redevelop this island. It's an ambitious project worth $9 billion, and infrastructure development is a big part of it. The plan is to build a transshipment terminal for ships, an international airport, and a gas and solar-based power plant on the island of Great Nicobar. The project could transform the island, turn it into a shipping hub, also a tourist destination. As of now, Great Nicobar is sparsely populated, but post-development, as many as 650,000 people could end up living there. 650,000 people, that's the estimate. And this project has clear advantages for India. The island is strategically located. It sits on the intersection of key shipping routes. It is close to key regional hubs like Colombo in Sri Lanka and Port Klang in Malaysia. Further east, you have Singapore. So developing this island, Great Nicobar, also makes economic sense for India. It could unlock a lot of potential. Plus, it would have strategic advantages, like keeping China in check. Let me explain with the map again. There are three choke points near Great Nicobar: Malacca, Sunda, and Lombok. Chinese ships transit through these straits. So this is a vulnerability for Beijing. By gaining a foothold in Great Nicobar, India can keep an eye on Chinese ships and their movements. And Beijing knows that it's a weakness for them. So in recent years, the Chinese have tried to increase their presence in this region. They've taken control of the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. They're eyeing another port in Myanmar on the Coco Islands. It's barely 55 kilometers away from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Apparently, China wants a military facility there. So for India, having a presence in Great Nicobar is a strategic necessity now. But the plan has met with opposition from the Congress party, that is India's main opposition party. They want the project to be scrapped and the permits to be withdrawn. Why? The Congress party has expressed two concerns. The first one is about the environment. They say this project poses an environmental threat, and they cite a government report to make their case. Last year, the government had told the parliament that more than 900,000 trees would be cut for this project. Now, the Congress argues that this mass deforestation threatens the ecology of Great Nicobar. Their second concern relates to the local tribes. Great Nicobar is home to the Shompen. It's an indigenous community. India classifies them, and I'm quoting, as a particularly vulnerable tribal group. Reports say there are about 100 to 400 Shompen people in Great Nicobar. They are nomadic hunter-gatherers. They live in the island's rainforest. Very few of them have had contact with the world outside. The Congress says this project would violate their rights and that the tribals were not consulted about it. Will this force the government to step back? There are no indications as of now. Earlier this year, India's President Draupadi Murmu had paid a visit to Great Nicobar. Reports say that she was given a presentation on the importance of the island. And this visit was also seen as a sign that New Delhi is serious about the project and it will move ahead. Now let's turn our attention to Africa, to South Africa, where a grand ceremony took place today. Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in as president for his second full term, and leaders from all over the world came to celebrate. But it wasn't business as usual in Pretoria, because this isn't the same Ramaphosa. He's now a humbled figure. His party, the African National Congress, or ANC, lost its parliamentary majority in last month's general election. So Ramaphosa now helms a coalition government. Today he acknowledged this fact. He acknowledged that South Africans have been disappointed by his party and he's promised to do better. Here's our report.
The people of South Africa have stressed that they are impatient with political bickering and the endless blame game amongst politicians and political parties. They want us to put their needs and aspirations first, and they want us to work together for the sake of our country. Today, I stand before you as your humble servant to say that we have heard you. The formation of a government of national unity is a moment of profound significance. It is the beginning of a new era.
Cyril Ramaphosa is back. Once again, he has taken oath as South Africa's president. It was a grand ceremony. You had marching bands and cannons being fired. There was also an air show. And of course, Ramaphosa's supporters were there, singing and dancing, celebrating their president's return.
I'm happy that the African National Congress Party won regardless of what people were saying. Forward with our president, we love him very much. We are all here filling up this place for our president. We are excited that he is being sworn in today. It's his day today. To our president we say, Viva President Ramaphosa, viva.
Normally, that would have been the common sentiment. The ANC has won every election in the last 30 years. But it is different this time around. The party didn't get an absolute majority on its own. So, it was forced to form a coalition government with its biggest rival, the Democratic Alliance Party. No one knows how this coalition government will perform, especially amid growing opposition. Some of Ramaphosa's opponents chose to skip his inauguration, as though to send a message that he should expect a tough fight during this presidential term. It's a reality that Ramaphosa must accept, but that reality will set in tomorrow. Today was about celebrating his return. There was almost a festive spirit in the South African winter air. It wasn't a public holiday. The government was clear about that. But arrangements were made for visitors, for supporters who wanted to attend Ramaphosa's swearing-in ceremony at Pretoria's Union buildings. Free shuttle rides had been arranged to draw in the crowd. It seems that Ramaphosa wanted a packed house. After all, he had friends to impress. Leaders had flown in from around Africa. The presidents of Nigeria, Namibia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Angola, and the DR Congo were all present. They were all present on the main stage, next to Ramaphosa. Then you had South African royalty, who graced the inauguration with their presence, and also issued a warning.
My biggest wish, one Nuguti president, be honest. Honest, nothing else, be honest. Politicians, be honest. Don't gamble with the lives of South African citizens, because next time, they will not tolerate it.
That may be the biggest takeaway from the whole inauguration. Beyond the pomp and ceremony lies a warning for the ANC. They barely managed to retain power this time, so they need to do better. They need to earn the people's trust back, or this grand oath-taking ceremony could be the last for the ANC.
Staying with Africa, our next story comes from Kenya, where a protest movement began yesterday. It is called Occupy Parliament, like the Occupy Wall Street movement from the US. Now, Occupy Wall Street was a protest against corporate avarice. Occupy Parliament is a protest against government greed in the form of back-breaking taxes. The protests were against Kenya's finance bill for 2024, their annual budget. Kenyans have been facing a mounting tax burden for years now, since President William Ruto came to power in 2022. Last year, there was a controversial housing tax and an increase in fuel levies. This year's finance bill was slated to bring more hardship. Kenya was poised to charge a value-added tax or VAT on bread, the most basic food item. The VAT on bread was going to be 16%. And that's not all. Ruto's government wanted to tax car owners as well, a recurring tax of 2.5% every year. Then there were taxes that just seem unethical. Listen to this.
Taxes are high. My mom just died from cancer, and we can't keep raising taxes on cancer treatment. You heard they're raising taxes even on donations. Women have no taxes are being taxed. We can't even afford diapers for the kids anymore. There are no vaccines in the hospitals for the children.
Ruto wanted to tax or raise taxes on cancer treatments, which are already unaffordable for most people. Disposable healthcare items like diapers and sanitary pads were also going to be taxed. These are already out of reach for the poor. The new taxes would have made them unaffordable for the middle class as well. This is why protests erupted in Kenya yesterday. The country is already facing a cost of living crisis. Things have been tough for the last few years, and every year the government decides to tax them further. So the people said enough was enough. They stepped out to reject the new taxes. Demonstrators made their way to the Parliament building in Nairobi to protest in front of their elected politicians. But they were stopped by the police, who fired tear gas shells and water cannons, also flashed their guns at the protesters and charged at them. Undercover officers infiltrated the demonstrations to get their hands on the protest leaders. It was complete chaos. Hundreds of people were arrested, but it seems that the protests had an effect, because the government has decided to roll back some of the taxes, the most controversial ones anyway.
We have listened to the view of Kenyans, and we are all in agreement that there are two things that we must do. One of them is that we need to protect Kenyans from increased cost of living, and therefore the proposed 16% VAT on bread has been dropped.
President Ruto also made a comment, a very roundabout comment.
We have made proposals to the legislature. The legislature have interrogated those proposals. The public has interrogated those proposals. The public have recommended, through public participation, their feelings, their ideas, their suggestions, and because the people's representatives have listened to the people through public participation, they have adjusted the proposals from the executive.
He sounds like he's praising Kenya's democracy. He says that public participation has made him rescind some taxes. But his police still went ahead and arrested protesters, which makes you wonder, is there something else planned? After all, Ruto is known to be relentless when it comes to taxes. Critics have compared him to a biblical tax collector, so it would be surprising if he backs down completely. There are already rumors that all is not as it seems. So the next few days will be crucial. Kenya's finance bill will be discussed in detail tomorrow in Parliament. Only then will the true extent of the new taxes become visible. So Kenyan protesters are getting ready to take to the streets again if the need arises. It's election season in America, and Joe Biden has a new trump card: immigration. Today, the US president unveiled a new immigration program. It could help almost 500,000 people get citizenship. The new plan targets undocumented spouses, that's people married to US citizens. It also affects young people, those looking for skilled work visas. Biden hopes that his new policy will rally his voter base, help him get some votes in the November election. But will it be enough against Trump's anti-immigration rhetoric? Our next report tells you.
It was 2012. Barack Obama was gearing up for elections.
And with your help,
I've been keeping the commitments that I made.
But it wasn't going to be easy. His immigration policies were isolating his voter base. Obama needed something new, something to convince his voters. So he signed the DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It shielded millions of undocumented immigrants from deportation. Obama's move got cheers and it helped him politically. 12 years later, Biden seems to have taken a page from his book. This election year, he's unveiled a new plan.
I'm not interested in playing politics with border or immigration.
An expansive immigration program. Once in place, it might help almost 500,000 people get citizenship. And Biden says it's the right thing to do.
I refuse to believe that to secure our border, we have to walk away from being in America. For that's generations have been renewed, revitalized, and refreshed by the talent, the skill, the hard work, the courage, and determination of immigrants coming to our country.
So what is Biden's grand immigration plan? Well, it's in two parts. The first is about undocumented spouses, those who are married to US citizens. This new plan will allow them to apply for permanent residency, even citizenship eventually. But they won't have to leave the country to do it. Under the current process, undocumented spouses must go back to their home country to fill out paperwork for legal status. Biden aims to eliminate that. And like we said, his move will affect around 500,000 spouses of US citizens. Of course, there's a caveat. It will only apply to those who have lived in America for 10 years or more.
These couples have been raising families, sending their kids to church and school, paying taxes, contributing to our country for 10 years or more. Matter of fact, the average time they've spent here is 23 years.
The policy will also affect around 50,000 young people, those under the age of 21. These are people whose parent is married to a US citizen. The administration also announced guidance for DACA recipients, also popularly known as Dreamers. The new policy will make it easier for them to obtain skilled work visas.
I'm announcing new measures to clarify and speed up work visas to help people, including Dreamers, who have graduated from U.S. colleges and universities, landed jobs in high-demand, high-skilled professions that we need to have grow to see our economy grow. It's the right thing to do.
But will this translate into votes? Biden and Trump are currently tied in the latest poll. To beat Trump, Biden needs to rally his voter base. And immigration could be a key issue. A recent poll suggested it was one of the top issues of these 2024 elections. Of course, the two leaders have very different stances on immigration. Trump has a blanket hardline anti-immigration stance. He says if he becomes president, America will see the biggest deportation in the country's history. Biden, too, has been tough on illegal migrants entering the US. But he now seems to be recalibrating his stance. His official line is simple. He wants to fix the immigration problem, but not by shutting down the border, but making the process simpler. According to him, it will help unite families, boost the labor market, and even in turn help the economy.
These are the fears my predecessor is trying to play on when he says immigrants, and his words are poison the blood of the country. When he calls immigrants, in his words, animals. Folks, I'm not interested in playing politics with border or immigration. I'm interested in fixing it.
So immigration seems to be Biden's trump card this election. But will it work? And will it be enough to actually beat Trump? Well, we'll find out in November.
Last week, Apple was the most valuable company in the world. This Monday, it was Microsoft. These are two of the most storied names in tech. But now the stock market has a new king, Nvidia, a chip maker based in the US. For the first time ever, Nvidia has become the most valuable company in the world. It is now valued at $3.34 trillion. Microsoft is at $3.32 trillion and Apple is at $3.27 trillion. Nvidia is on top. And why does it matter? I'll give you three reasons why. First, this is an underdog story. Nvidia is a relative newcomer to the world of mega caps, and its rise is among the fastest in market history. Today, its stock is worth nearly $136. 8 years ago, it was less than 1% of its current price. Second, Nvidia's sales and profits have surpassed expectations. Look at its blockbuster first quarter, with a 262% increase in revenue and a 462% increase in profits year-on-year. With such fierce growth, Nvidia has leapfrogged its competitors, and this is the third reason. For perspective, look at Apple. It crossed the 1 trillion valuation in 2018. But Apple hit the 3 trillion mark only last year. So Apple took nearly 5 years to go from 1 to 3 trillion. Same with Microsoft, but not Nvidia. 2 years ago, its market valuation was about $400 billion. Last year, it struck $1 trillion, and now it's worth more than 3 trillion in less than a year. Now, the speed of growth has been startling, especially when you look at where and how they started. Nvidia was founded in 1993 to build chips for video games, and that's what they did for decades, until CEO Jensen Huang chose to do something else, diversify. He wanted to ride technology's next wave, artificial intelligence. It was quite the bet. AI was not as big then, yet Nvidia switched tracks and it invested heavily. It made computer chips needed to create AI systems, known as GPUs, graphics processing units. And now that bet is paying off. AI is taking over the world, and leading the charge is Nvidia. It controls about 80% of the market for AI chips. It sells everything from chips to AI software to supercomputers. Nvidia chips are used to run groundbreaking AI models like ChatGPT. Tech giants are buying AI chips in bulk. All of them have deals with Nvidia. Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google. Simply put, Huang anticipated a gold rush and chose to sell shovels to the miners. It was the surest way to make money, which he has. Nvidia made its stock market debut in 1999. Since then, its shares have skyrocketed. By how much? More than 591,000%. 591,000%. Let that sink in. This meteoric rise has made Nvidia a Wall Street darling, and its founder Huang the so-called Taylor Swift of tech. The 61-year-old is being treated like a rock star. Maybe his leather jacket is a contributing factor, but wherever he goes, crowds chant his name, they scramble for autographs, and they call it Jensanity. After all, Jensen Huang is now one of the world's richest people. With an estimated net worth of $117 billion, he's calling this AI rush the new industrial revolution. But some wonder if this growth can be sustained, and to others, this tech bubble is problematic because much of the chip power is concentrated in the hands of one man. Nvidia does have some competitors like AMD or Advanced Micro Devices. It is run by Huang's cousin. Maybe battling for chip domination runs in the family. But so far, no company has been able to eat into Nvidia's market share. Analysts say this won't change anytime soon, so Wall Street continues to adore its AI poster child. And AI heavyweights are betting on the company. For all we know, this could be the second AI bet that pays off for Nvidia. For our next story, let me give you a number. 800 million. That's the total number of people that go hungry every year. But what if I told you that we have enough food for all of them, to feed them? That's right. Every year, the world wastes 1.3 billion tons of food. Imagine that. That's enough food to feed almost 2 billion people. But why are we wasting so much food? Is overconsumption the biggest culprit here? And what can we do to reduce it? Our next report tells you.
Convenience stores. They are an urban oasis, a one-stop solution for everything. Need a midday snack? Go to a convenience store. Need emergency toilet supplies? Go to a convenience store. In Japan, convenience stores are like a lifeline. They are open 24/7 for 365 days. And it's a huge industry that's almost worth $77 billion a year. But this convenience comes at a price. Yes, it's an appealing business model, but it's also linked to this. Massive wastage of food. Take sushi rolls, for example. It's a Japanese staple and a popular snack at convenience stores. Japan's 55,657 convenience stores threw out 947 121 ihomaki rolls. And that's just one day. What's the total cost of this food wastage? Around $5 million. The problem here is the sheer volume. Convenience stores stock a variety of items because they must cater to every need of the customer. But that means a lot of this food is unsold. But unlike bigger shops, say a supermarket, they have less capacity. So they can't store much surplus. And that means more waste. Look at the numbers in 2020. Japan's major convenience stores threw away around $30,000 of food per shop. When you add up the numbers, it's staggering. Nearly $2 billion of food is thrown away every year. And it's almost ironic given Japan imports 63% of its food. But Japan is not alone in doing this. Food wastage is a global issue, and every country is guilty of it. Roughly a third of the world's food is wasted. That's 1.3 billion tons every single year. Now this food wastage happens in two stages. One, during production. In developing nations, this is a huge cause of food wastage. 40% of losses occur at post-harvest and processing levels. Then comes the loss at the retail sector. Nearly 35% of food is simply thrown out by supermarkets, shops and households. Most of it is perfect for consumption. And it happens majorly in developed nations. 40% of their food loss happens at retail and consumer levels. Consumers in rich countries waste almost as much food as the entire net food production of sub-Saharan Africa each year. Imagine that. All this wasted food can feed around 2 billion people. That's 1/4 of the global population. This is criminal because globally around 800 million people face hunger every year. So even if some of this food is not wasted, it can eradicate global hunger. And that's what countries aim to do. But reducing wastage won't be an easy task. It requires a multi-pronged approach. For convenience stores and restaurants, it means better inventory management systems where stocks are stored more efficiently, thus reducing the volume of unsold goods. For households, it means only buying products that you really need. Convenience stores may be a great asset in our fast-paced lives, but it's time to look beyond the instant gratification.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Environmental protesters spray paint on Britain's Stonehenge. In the US, a gleaming monolith pops up in the Nevada desert, but no one knows who put it there. And Japan's Mount Fuji installs a crowd control gate to counter over-tourism. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1981, India launched the Apple satellite. It was the country's first communication satellite. Ironically, the satellite had to be carried on a bullock cart. This was to create a non-magnetic environment that wouldn't mess with the satellite's antenna. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
こんにちは。リストバンドを拝見させていただきます。ありがとうございます。よろしくお願いいたします。